Hey, my name is Josh. When I was about 11 years old, I was in my living room. It was about 1 a.m. Everybody else in the house was asleep, and all of a sudden I started seeing like an orange glow outside of my front window. We lived right next to an airport, so I really didn't think much of anything of it. Well, the glow started getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and I started hearing a low hum. And it wasn't like an electronic hum that I've heard before. So I kind of started freaking out a little bit, like, what's going on? Is there a helicopter getting close to my apartment? I just really didn't know. So I got up and looked outside. And what I saw was a disc-shaped object hovering probably about 400 or 500 feet away from the apartment up in the sky.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris Ramsey, and welcome back to yet another episode of Debriefed. And today we are going to be continuing our read-through of the Alien Interview by Lawrence R. Spencer. Allegedly, 1947, this nurse was given permission, or she was the only one able to communicate with the last surviving alien that crashed at Roswell, and since then has sent her notes to the author here. And he took the transcripts verbatim and published them here. And this is basically a discussion between a person and an alien. And the alien, known as Airl, who identifies as an Isby being the spirit that inhabits all living sentient beings, including ourselves, has revealed to us that they've been monitoring and visiting Earth for thousands of years. And Airl, as a matter of fact, is over, I think, close to 500 million years old. I don't know. This story gets a little wild, and starting now, it gets even wilder. Before we get started, there are multiple ways that you guys can help out Area 52 if you want to do that for free. Obviously, leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, but also if you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, leave us a review there. A 5-star review goes a long way. If you want to take it one step further, you can visit area52.shop. We got some merch, not much left because it keeps selling out, thanks to you guys, but we got some stuff there that you guys can check out. And lastly, if you really want to support what we do, go ahead and become an intern at Area 52, otherwise known as joining the memberships or the Patreon. You get weekly vlogs, access to the archive, and so much more, including early access to these videos. So all of the interns actually got these videos early. If you want to do that, go ahead and do that. Folks, we paid the bills. It is time to continue with our read-through. Let's get into it. Yeah, we left off talking about how space travel technologies started 80 trillion years ago. Yeah, I guess quick little reminder to check the disbelief at the door, at least for the next hour or so. It'll be right where you left it when you choose to pick it back up. But I often like reminding people that, you don't have to be religious to read the Bible, and you don't have to be a physicist to read physics books, although you probably have to be a physicist to understand what's in the physics books, but you can read them without becoming a physicist, right? And that's kind of what this is about. We're reading something that might be fiction, but that doesn't mean we have to believe it. This whole believe it or don't believe it thing, frankly, annoys me a little bit. When people are like, do you believe in that? Or do you not believe in that? Or I don't believe this guy. I believe that guy. This guy's lying. I don't believe him. He's telling the truth. It's information. Take it in. Don't believe anything. Don't not believe anything. Why do you have to commit to something? Why is everything so binary? Just absorb the information. And that's it. Only when we have a strong conviction about something do we become defensive about that stance. And that's usually what we're seeing in these arguments in the community and everything else. So, just take it as information. All right, let's go. Airl described the abilities of an Isby officer of the domain to me, and she demonstrated one to me when she contacted telepathically a communications officer of the domain who is stationed in the asteroid belt. Whoa. So Airl's got some type of instant Wi-Fi, communication going here with the domain in the asteroid belt. The asteroid belt is composed of thousands of broken up pieces of a planet that once existed between Mars and Jupiter. It serves as a good low-gravity jumping-off point for incoming spacecraft traveling toward the center of our galaxy. She requested that this officer consult information stored in the files of the domain concerning the history of Earth, She asked the communications officer to feed this information to Airl. The communications officer immediately complied with the request. Based on the information stored in the files of the domain, Airl was able to give me a brief overview or history lesson. This is what Airl told me that the domain had observed about the history of Earth. Okay, here we go. She told me that the Domain Expeditionary Force first entered the Milky Way galaxy very recently, only about 10,000 years ago. Their first action was to conquer the home planets of the Old Empire. This is not the official name, but a nickname given to the conquered civilization by the Domain forces. The Old Empire that served as the seat of central government for this galaxy and other adjoining regions of space. These planets are located in the star systems in the tail of the Big Dipper constellation. She did not mention which stars exactly. About 1,500 years later, the Domain began the installation bases for their forces along the path of invasion, which led towards the center of this galaxy and beyond. About 8,200 years ago, the Domain forces set up a base on Earth in the Himalaya Mountains near the border of modern Pakistan and Afghanistan. This was a base for a battalion of the Domain Expeditionary Force, which included about 3,000 members. This is sounding a lot more like Star Wars. And, the beauty about Star Wars and the reason why I think it gained so much popularity is because at some level, it resonates true with our own perspective of what the universe or what the galaxies might be like if they were inhabited by, an empire. And that's the one thing I will say about this topic in particular, especially when I hear about the Galactic Federation and things like that. Like, I want nothing more, let's be clear, than for all of this to be real. I mean, if this is real, then to some extent, Jedi Force and lightsabers are real. Right? I mean, where are we going to draw the line here? All right. They set up a base under or inside the top of a mountain. The mountain was drilled into and made hollow to create an area large enough to house the ships and personnel of that force. An electronic illusion of the mountaintop was created to hide the base by projecting a false image from inside the mountain against a force screen. The ships could then enter and exit through the force screen, yet remain unseen by Homo sapiens. This is interesting because Lacerda, in the Lacerda files, which we've read, which was a reptilian who, they said they lived underground, they also had something similar. It wasn't a force screen necessarily, unless we're talking about the same thing, but I think the one that Lacerda described was something that interfaced with human beings' perception of things. So they didn't actually have to distort anything visually, they just had to distort the impression of it in our minds. Shortly after they settled there, the base was surprised by an attack from a remnant of the military forces of the Old Empire. Unbeknownst to the Domain, a hidden underground base on Mars, operated by the Old Empire, had existed for a very long time. The Domain base was wiped out by the military attack from the Mars base, and the ISBs of the Domain Expeditionary Force were captured. You can imagine that the Domain was very upset about losing such a large force of officers and crew. So they sent other crews to Earth to look for them. Those crews were also attacked. The captured ISBs from the Domain forces were handled in the same fashion as all other ISBs who have been sent to Earth. They were each given amnesia, had their memories replaced with false pictures and hypnotic commands, and sent to Earth to inhabit biological bodies. They are still a part of the human population today. Whoa, hold on a second. Wait, what? What are we talking about here? Are we saying that some of these ISBs are among us and they don't know it? Whoa. After a very persistent and extensive investigation into the loss of their crews, the Domain discovered that Old Empire had been operating a very extensive and carefully hidden base of operations in this part of the galaxy for millions of years. No one knows exactly how long. Eventually, the spacecraft of the Old Empire forces and the Domain engaged each other in open combat in the space of the solar system. I wonder if this could be the war that Lacerda was also referring to, but I feel like that war was much older. But perhaps this is No, actually it was that because it was like the Younger Dryas, right? It was like 10,000 years ago or something like that. According to Airl, there was a running battle between the Old Empire forces and the Domain until about 1235 AD, when the Domain forces finally destroyed the last spacecraft of the Old Empire. The Domain Expeditionary Force lost so many of its own ships in this area during that time also. About 1,000 years later, the Old Empire base was discovered by accident in the spring of 1914. The discovery was made when the body of an Archduke of Austria was taken over, in quotes, by an officer of the Domain Expeditionary Force. This officer, who was stationed in the asteroid belt, was sent to Earth on a routine mission to gather reconnaissance. Okay, hold on. So they sent one of the Isby spirits down to take over this Archduke of Austria. Now, we got a footnote here. I'm curious to know who this Archduke might be. Franz Ferdinand. Whoa, okay. He was an Archduke of Austria, Prince of Imperial of Austria, and Prince Royal of Hungary and Bohemia. But here we go. 1914, June 28th at 11:15 a.m., Franz Ferdinand and his wife were killed in Sarajevo, the event known as the Assassination of Sarajevo, which triggered World War I. So the purpose of the takeover was to use the body as a disguise through which to infiltrate human society in order to gather information about current events on Earth. The officer, as an Isby, having greater power than the being inhabiting the body of the Archduke, simply pushed the being out and took control of the body. Whoa! Really treating them like puppets. However, this officer did not realize how much Habsburg were hated by feuding factions in the country, so he was caught off guard when the body of the Archduke was assassinated by a Bosnian student. The officer, or Isby, was suddenly knocked out of the body when it was shot by the assassin. Disoriented, the Isby inadvertently penetrated one of the amnesia force screens and was captured. Oh, okay. So the Isby leaves the body of the Archduke, penetrates the force screen, gets captured by, I'm guessing, the Empire. Eventually, the Domain discovered that a wide area of space is monitored by an electronic force field, which controls all of the Isbys in this end of the galaxy, including Earth. The electronic force screen is designed to detect Isbys and prevent them from leaving this area. Whoa. If an Isby attempts to penetrate the force screen, it captures them in a kind of electronic net. The result is that the captured Isby is subjected to a very severe brainwashing treatment, which erases the memory of the Isby. This process uses a tremendous electrical shock, just like Earth psychiatrists use electric shock therapy to erase the memory and personality of a patient and to make them more cooperative. Whoa, that's crazy. So like anyone who dies, when their spirit goes, they're zapped if they go past this barrier, and then their memories are once again erased and they have to go back. On Earth, this therapy uses only a few hundred volts of electricity. However, the electrical voltage used by the Old Empire operation against Isby is on the order of magnitude of billions of volts. This tremendous shock completely wipes out all memory of the Isby. The memory erasure is not just for one life or one body. It wipes out all of the accumulated experiences of a nearly infinite past, as well as the identity of the Isby. The shock is intended to make it impossible for the Isby to remember who they are, where they came from, their knowledge or skills, their memory of the past, and ability to function as a spiritual entity. They are overwhelmed into becoming a mindless, robotic non-entity. Whoa, so they're out here creating NPCs, is what I'm gathering from this. But only if you sort of go out of line, only if you try to escape the Matrix, which is wild because if you have seen the recent interview featuring Matt Brown, a whistleblower, This interview was conducted by George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell on his show Weaponized. It was a 3-part series, very fascinating, but this guy came across the documents now known, now presented to Congress as Immaculate Constellation, which we've covered. If you want to see the entire read-through of that document, very fascinating. Go and check that out. But he does mention a few cryptic things.
I think humanity to some level is a resource for them. Possibly a commodity, possibly a form of entertainment, possibly medical related. We live in the Matrix. You are not free. And this reality has far more to it than you have been allowed to believe.
But that Matrix comment really gels with what we're talking about here. It also really coalesces with, the container idea. Ooh, I don't like the sound of this. All right, let's keep reading. After the shock, a series of post-hypnotic suggestions are used to install false memories and a false time orientation in each ISB. This includes the command to return to the base after the body dies, so that the same kind of shock and hypnosis can be done again and again, forever. The hypnotic command also tells the patient to forget to remember. What the domain learned from the experience of this officer is that the old empire has been using Earth as a prison planet for a very long time. Exactly how long is unknown, perhaps millions of years. Whoa. What's interesting about this theory, because I've heard this theory before, but it's almost like the sort of karmic circle that we're trying to escape, but we keep having to sort of relive something. I've also heard people, remote viewers, I think, have looked into this as well and have found some technology suppressing the soul somehow. I don't even know, right? It's very fringe stuff, but I've heard like when you pass and you see the light, that's actually like that's a ruse, right? That's like, don't go towards it because that's maybe what this is. Whoa. It's crazy to think about, dude. That's so dark, One thing I always think about is what is so dark that when somebody finds out what the secret of the phenomenon is, they refuse to share it with others. What is that? How can it be so bad? Because if it's good, then there's no reason to keep it secret, right? And I think Matt Brown talks about that as well. There's no reason to keep it secret if it's good. So, okay, let's say it is bad. It's got to be pretty bad in order to keep it like that much of a secret, because I think the public could handle aliens. Complete speculation, and they could be wrong, but I'm saying as a thought experiment, what would that be? And I think the scariest thing that I could possibly imagine is when you're free of the physical body and you go beyond and you think, oh, this is, I leave the Matrix, that's still them. I don't know if I like that. Whoa. Yeah, that would be enough for to drive people mad. But hey, what are you going to do? If that is the case, I mean, whatever. What do you want to do? So when the body of an ISB dies, they depart from the body. They are detected by the force screen. They are captured and ordered by hypnotic command to return to the light. Yep, there you go. The idea of heaven and the afterlife are part of the hypnotic suggestion, a part of the treachery that makes the whole mechanism work. Whoa. Crazy. But also, if you give me heaven or afterlife, be it real or fake, I mean, if I don't know the difference, ignorance is bliss. But that would suck. After the ISB has been shocked and hypnotized to erase the memory of the life they just lived, the ISB is immediately commanded, hypnotically, to report back to Earth, as though they were on a secret mission to inhabit a new body. Each ISB is told that they have a special purpose for being on Earth, but of course there is no purpose for being in a prison, at least not for the prisoner. Whoa. I don't like this. I don't I don't like this at all. If this is what's going on, this is not cool. Don't do that, old empire. Quit it. Any undesirable ISBs who were sentenced to Earth were classified as untouchable by the old empire. This included anyone that the old empire judged to be criminals who are too vicious to be reformed or subdued, as well as other criminals such as sexual perverts or beings unwilling to do any productive work. So a literal prison planet, like they're sending prisoners here. An untouchable classification of ISBs also includes a wide variety of political prisoners. This includes ISBs who are considered to be non-compliant freethinkers or revolutionaries who make trouble for the governments of the various planets of the old empire. Of course, anyone with a previous military record against the old empire is also shipped off to Earth. A list of untouchables include artists, painters, singers, musicians, writers, actors, and performers of every kind. For this reason, Earth has more artists per capita than any other planet in the old empire. Now that's something I can get behind, folks. Part of this is like nice and neatly packaged, I will say as well, for the reader. As in we're like, yeah, but we can't all be prisoners. And then like the next sentence is like, no, but there's also really cool artists and really free thinkers. And we're like, yeah, that's me. Everybody's like, that's me. So it is, I do understand, the fiction side of it. But again, I will say for someone who, I think Lawrence R. Spencer is a fiction, obviously a nonfiction or science fiction writer, but the depth of lore here, it's really, really deep. And I don't want to call, Lawrence an amateur writer because I don't think he's an amateur writer. But this is so deep. It's easy to chalk it up to, oh, this guy just made it up. But kudos if he made it up, because this is a really well-rounded hypothetical universe that this person's created. And I think that deserves merit in and of itself. Untouchables also include intellectuals, inventors, and geniuses in almost every field. Since everything the old empire considers valuable has long since been invented or created over the last few trillion years, they have no further use for such beings. This includes skilled managers also, which are not needed in a society of obedient robotic citizens. We're trapped with all the Karens here, folks. Anyone who is not willing or able to submit to mindless economic, political, and religious servitude as a tax-paying worker in the class system of the old empire are untouchable and sentenced to receive memory wipeout and permanent imprisonment on Earth. The net result is that the ISB is unable to escape because they can't remember who they are, where they came from, or where they are. They have been hypnotized to think they are someone, something, sometime, and somewhere other than where they really are. The domain officer who was assassinated while in the body of Archduke of Austria was likewise captured by the old empire force. Because this particular officer was a high-powered ISB, compared to most, he was taken away to a secret old empire base under the surface of the planet Mars. They put him into a special electronic prison cell and held him there. Fortunately, this domain officer was able to escape from the underground base after 27 years in captivity. When he escaped from the old empire base, he returned immediately to his own base in the asteroid belt. His commanding officer ordered that a battle cruiser be dispatched to the coordinates of the base provided by his officer and to destroy that base completely. This old empire base was located a few hundred miles north of the equator on Mars in the Cydonia region. It is interesting just right here, because this is all just notes. This is all apparently Matilda's translation of the being's telepathic communications to her. Pretty intense and extensive and rather detailed, I would say. Almost a little too detailed. You know what I mean? This is turning slowly into just a book and less of a transcript. You feel me on that? Maybe I'm just looking for a reason for this not to be true at this point. I might be. But still fascinating, man. Although the military base of the old empire was destroyed, unfortunately most of the vast machinery of the ISB force screens, the electroshock, amnesia, hypnosis machinery continues to function in other discovered locations right up to the present moment. The main base or control center for this mind control prison operation has never been found. So the influences of this base or bases are still in effect. The domain has observed that since the old Empire space forces were destroyed, there is no one left to actively prevent the planetary systems from bringing their own untouchable ISBs to Earth from all over this galaxy, and from other galaxies nearby. Therefore, Earth has become a universal dumping ground for this entire region of space. Now, this is ringing true. This is kind of hitting home. This, in part, explains the very unusual mix of races, cultures, languages, moral codes, religious and political influences among the ISB population on Earth. The number and variety of heterogeneous societies on Earth are extremely unusual on a normal planet. Most Sun-type 12 Class 7 planets are inhabited by only one humanoid body type or race, if any. In addition, most of the ancient civilizations of Earth and many of the events of Earth have been heavily influenced by the hidden, hypnotic operation of the old Empire base. So far, no one has figured out exactly where and how this operation is run, or by whom, because it is so heavily protected by screens and traps. Furthermore, there's been no operation undertaken to seek out, discover, and destroy the vast and ancient networks of electronics machinery that create the ISB force screens at this end of the galaxy. Until this has been done, we are not able to prevent or interrupt the electric shock operation, hypnosis, and remote thought control of the old Empire prison planet. Of course, all of the crew members of the Domain Expeditionary Force now remain aware of this phenomena at all times while operating in this solar system space so as to prevent detection and the capture by old Empire traps. I don't know how y'all are feeling about this, but I'm feeling a little, I don't like it, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it feels like there is hope in this universe, right? Perhaps this secret war going on between governments or ungovernmented factions of special forces. Perhaps what's happening right now is they're trying to get a hold of this base and destroy it. You know, that would be a cool thing. I would love for that to be the secret. You know, this whole time we're thinking, no, the U.S. government is completely nefarious and they are hiding things from us for our detriment. And when in reality, they're actually fighting this secret war trying to free our souls. That would be such a cool plot for a movie. Oh my God. We proceed to the chunkier half of this read-through. Chapter 8, A Lesson in Recent History. Matilda's personal note, and the only little note that exists. This interview taught me a history lesson I will never read in any textbook written on Earth. The Domain has a much different view of events than we do. I've been reading a few Prison Planet comments before this video and expected to see it in this read-through, but even knowing what I was getting into is still kind of upsetting. The Domain Expeditionary Force has observed a resurgence in science and culture of the Western world since 1150 AD, when the remaining remnants of the space fleet of the old Empire in this solar system were destroyed. The influence of the remote control hypnosis operation diminished slightly after that time, but still remains largely in force. Apparently, a small amount of damage was done to the old Empire remote mind control operation, which resulted in a small decrease in the power of this mechanism. As a result, some memory of technologies that ISBs already knew before they came to Earth started to be remembered. Thereafter, the oppression of knowledge that is called the Dark Ages in Europe began to diminish after that time. Whoa. So they're saying the Dark Ages was a direct result of this hypnotic sort of suppression tool that the old Empire had implemented. You know, the one thing I find interesting is that they said prior that the memories, the shock was so strong that it would completely erase and obliterate people's memory of their almost infinite existence. And now we take down a few of these things and suddenly, oh, memories coming back? Is it this suppression system that's keeping the memories from coming back? Or is it this electronic shock that's completely erasing them? Or is it a mix of both? I don't know. Since then, the knowledge of the basic laws of physics and electricity have revolutionized Earth culture virtually overnight. The ability to remember technology by many of the geniuses in the ISB population of Earth was partially restored, when not so actively suppressed as it was before 1150. Sir Isaac Newton is one of the best examples of this. In only a few decades, he single-handedly reinvented several major and fundamental scientific and mathematical disciplines. I mean, Nikola Tesla would be a great example of that. I think, this guy was just literally getting information from somewhere else. Maybe he was just an officer ISB, doing his job, an officer of the domain, I should say. The men who remembered these sciences already knew them before they were sent to Earth. Ordinarily, no one would ever observe or discover as much about science and mathematics in a single lifetime, or even in a few hundred lifetimes. These subjects have taken civilizations billions and billions of years to create. ISBs on Earth have only just begun to remember small fragments of all the technologies that exist throughout the universe. Theoretically, if the amnesia mechanisms being used against Earth could be broken entirely, ISBs would regain all of their memory. See, that seems to be such like a happy ending type deal. It's like, what is it, man? Are you erasing all of our memory, or is it this thing suppressing them and destroying them would free us all? It sounds too much like a Hollywood plot at this point. I'm not trying to be a hater, but again, I don't quite like the idea of this, so that's why I'm trying. All right, just I don't like the idea of this old empire. Okay. Unfortunately, similar advances have not been seen in the humanities as the ISBs of Earth continue to behave very badly towards each other. This behavior, however, is heavily influenced by the hypnotic commands given to each ISB between lifetimes, and the very unusual combination of inmates on Earth, criminals, perverts, artists, revolutionaries, and geniuses, is the cause of a very restive and tumultuous environment. The purpose of the prison planet is to keep ISBs on Earth forever, promoting ignorance, superstition, and war between ISBs, helps to keep the prison population crippled and trapped behind the wall of electronic force screens. ISBs have been dumped on Earth from all over the galaxy, adjoining galaxies, and from planetary systems all over the old empire, like Sirius, Aldebaran, the Pleiades, Orion, Draconis, and countless others. There are ISBs on Earth from unnamed races, civilizations, cultural backgrounds, and planetary environments. Each of the various ISB populations have their own languages, belief systems, moral values, religious beliefs, training, and unknown and untold histories. These ISBs are mixed together with earlier inhabitants of Earth who came from another star system more than 400,000 years ago to establish the civilizations of Atlanta and Lemuria. Those civilizations vanished beneath the tidal waves caused by the planetary polar shift many thousands of years before the current prison population started to arrive. Apparently, the ISBs from those star systems were the source of the original Oriental races of Earth beginning in Australia. Okay, so if we recall Lacerda, she said that this tidal event that happened was Younger Dryas, was that like 12,000 to 15,000 years ago? What Lacerda said, that was actually the result of a fight between two races, right? The Elohim and the other humanoid beings, or the humanoid and the reptilian beings. Anyways, there was a war and they kind of wiped everything out. And those waves weren't caused by a meteor or anything. They were caused, by bombs, essentially. On the other hand, the civilizations set up on Earth by the Old Empire prison system were very different from the civilization of the Old Empire itself, which is an electronic space opera, atomic-powered conglomeration of earlier civilizations that were conquered with nuclear weapons and colonized by ISBs from another galaxy. The bureaucracy that controlled the former Old Empire was from an ancient space opera society run by a totalitarian confederation of planetary governments, regulated by a brutal social, economic, and political hierarchy, with a royal monarch as its figurehead. This sounds reptilian. This type of government emerges with regularity on planets where the citizens abandon personal responsibility for autonomous self-regulation. They frequently lose their freedom to demented Isbys who suffer from an overwhelming paranoia that every other Isby is their enemy who must be controlled or destroyed. Their closest friends and allies, whom they espouse to love and cherish, are literally loved to death by them. This is interesting. This type of government, it says this type of government emerges with regularity on planets where citizens abandon personal responsibility for autonomous self-regulation. Sounds a lot like AI. It does sound like AI. Like, what if AI happened and then these guys come along because they're like, oh, you guys are just going to give up? You're going to give your souls to AI? We'll just take it from here. Because such Isbys exists, the domain has learned that freedom must be won and maintained through eternal vigilance and the ability to use defensive force to maintain it. As a result, the domain has already conquered the governing planet of the old empire. The civilization of the domain, although considerably younger and smaller in size, is already more powerful, better organized, and united by egalitarian esprit de corps, spirit of body, never known in the history of the old empire. So togetherness defeats, this warmongering mentality. The recently despoiled German totalitarian state on Earth was similar to the old empire, but not nearly as brutal. Whoa, really? And about 10,000 times less powerful. Many of the Isbys on Earth are here because they are violently opposed to totalitarian government, or because they were so psychotically vicious that they could not be controlled by old empire government. Whoa. So that would make for a planet filled with turmoil and conflict, right? If you send people here who are literally against totalitarian rule, but also people who are psychotic and power hungry, right? That would create constant conflict, which would essentially perpetuate and propel this idea of a prison planet. We'd just be fighting each other blind to the fact that there's a greater fight to be fought. It's a good plan. Consequently, the population of Earth is disproportionately comprised of a very high percentage of such beings. The conflicting cultural and ethical moral codes of the Isbys on Earth is unusual in the extreme. The domain conquest of the central old empire planets was fought with electronic cannon. The citizens of the old planets forming the core of government for the old empire are filthy, degraded, slave society of mindless tax-paying workers who practice cannibalism, violent automotive racetracks, and bloody Roman circus-type entertainments are their only amusements. Whoa. Regardless of any reasonable justification we may have had for using atomic weapons to vanquish the planets of the old empire, the domain is careful not to ruin the resources of those planets by using weapons of crude radioactive force. The current U.S. civilization is beginning to mimic some of the trappings of that civilization, especially in the design of airplanes, automobiles, ships, trains, and telephones. Likewise, buildings in the cities of Earth are thought to be modern or futuristic if their design resembles the architecture of the old empire. The government of the old empire, before being supplanted by the domain, was comprised of beings who possessed a very craven intelligence, very much like the Axis powers during your recent World War. Those beings manifested precisely the same behavior as the Galactic government that exiled them to eternal imprisonment on Earth. They were a gruesome reminder of the ageless maxim that an Isby will often manifest the treatment they have received from others. Kindness fosters kindness. Cruelty begets cruelty. One must be able and willing to use force, tempered with intelligence, to prevent harm to the innocent. However, extraordinary understanding, self-discipline, and courage are required to effectively prevent brutality without being overwhelmed by the malice that motivated the brutality. Only a demonic self-serving government would employ a logic or science to conceive that an ultimate solution to any problem is to murder and permanently erase the memory of every artist, genius, skilled manager, and inventor, and cast them into a planetary prison together with political opponents, killers, thieves, perverts, and disabled beings of an entire galaxy. We out here folks. I mean, we out here, dude. It ain't easy, being a Sun Type 12 Class 7 civilization. Once the Isbis, expelled from the old empire, arrived on Earth, they were given amnesia and hypnotically tricked into thinking that something else had happened to them. The next step was to implant the Isbis into biological bodies on Earth. The bodies became the human populations of false civilizations, which were designed and installed in the minds of Isbis to look completely unlike the old empire. All of the Isbis of India, Egypt, Babylon, Greece, Rome, and medieval Europe were guided to pattern and build the cultural elements of these societies based on standard patterns developed by the Isbis of many earlier similar civilizations on Sun Type 12 Class 7 planets that have existed for trillions of years throughout the universe. In the earliest times, Isbis sent to prison Earth lived in India. They gradually spread into Mesopotamia, Egypt, Mesoamerica, Archaea, Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, and to the New World. They were hypnotically commanded to follow the pattern of a given civilization by the old empire prison operators. This is an effective mechanism to disguise the actual time and location from the Isbis imprisoned on Earth. The language, costumes, and culture of each false civilization are intended to reinforce amnesia, because they do not remind the Isbis on Earth of the original old empire planets from which they were deported. On the very far back track of time, these types of civilizations tended to repeat themselves over and over, because the Isbis who created them become familiar with certain patterns and styles and stayed with them. It is a lot of work to invent an entire civilization, complete with culture and architecture, language, customs, mathematics, moral values, and so forth. It is much easier to replicate a copy based on a familiar and successful pattern. A Sun Type 12 Class 7 planet is the designation given to a planet inhabited by carbon-oxygen-based life forms. The class of the planet is based on the size and radiation intensity of the star, the distance of the planetary orbit from the star, and the size, density, gravity, or chemical composition of the planet. Likewise, flora and fauna are designated and identified according to the star type and class of planet they inhabit. Got that? So what are the other ones? Do we get to find out what our brother and sister planets are? On the average, the percentage of planets in the physical universe with a breathable atmosphere is relatively small. Most planets do not have an atmosphere upon which life forms feed, as on Earth, where the chemical compositions of the atmosphere provides nutrition to plants and other organisms, which in turn support other life forms. When the domain force brought the Vedic hymns to the Himalaya regions about 8,200 years ago, some human societies already existed. The Aryan people invaded and conquered India, bringing the Vedic hymns to the area. I'm a little ignorant to this. I don't know everything, folks. That's part of this journey, is that we get to figure it out. I'm sure there's some of you out there that are also a little lost here. What are the Vedic hymns?
The Vedic hymns are a collection of ancient religious texts that form the core of the Vedas, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism. Composed in Sanskrit between approximately 1500 and 500 BCE, these hymns are primarily found in the Rig Veda, the oldest of the four Vedas. They consist of praises, prayers, and mantras dedicated to various deities like Agni, the fire god, Indra, the king of gods, and Soma, a ritual drink. These hymns are recited during rituals and ceremonies and are considered to have spiritual and philosophical significance. They also cover a wide range of topics, including cosmology, ethics, and the nature of it.
So the domain force brought the Vedic hymns. I mean, that would make sense, right? If there is some deeper knowledge out there that exists, that would have been brought to us by a more intelligent species. So the Vedas were learned by them, memorized and carried forward verbally for 7,000 years before being committed to written form. During that span of time, one of the officers of the Domain Expeditionary Force was incarnated on Earth as Vishnu. He is described many times in the Rig Veda. he is still considered to be a god by the Hindus. Vishnu fought in the religious wars against the old empire forces. He is a very able and aggressive Isbi, as well as a highly effective officer, who has since been reassigned to other duties in the domain. How cool! That's such a cool lore. This is so cool. If this is reality is like the best science fiction novel of all, right? If this was true, that would be just the best. Now you're thinking, which is it, Chris? Do you like this? Do you not like this? I don't know. I like the idea of this like soul battle going on. Like the science fiction nerd in me is like thriving right now. But, you know, the human, which is on the outside of this Isby, is kind of scared. But, you know, either way, I think incredibly entertaining, to say the least. This entire episode was orchestrated as an attack and revolt against the Egyptian pantheon installed by old empire administrators. The conflict was intended to help free humankind from implanted elements of the false civilization that focused attention on many gods as superstitious ritual worships demanded by the priests who managed them. It is all part of the mental manipulation by the old empire to hide their criminal actions against the Isbis on Earth. Whoa, okay, so the ancient Egyptians were the empire. And then the ancient Hindu was, you know, the domain Isbis. A priesthood or prison guards were used to help reinforce the idea that an individual is only a biological body and is not an immortal spiritual being. The individual has no identity. The individuals have no past lives. The individual has no power. Only the gods have power. And the gods are a contrivance of the priests who intercede between men and the gods they serve. Men are slaves to the dictates of the priests who threaten eternal spiritual punishment if men do not obey them. What else would one expect on a prison planet where all prisoners have amnesia and the priests themselves are prisoners? The intervention of the domain force on Earth has not been entirely successful due to the secret mind control operation of the old empire that still continues to operate. A battle was waged between old empire forces and the domain through religious conquest between 1500 BC and about 1200 BC. The domain forces attempted to teach the concept of an individual immortal spiritual being to several influential beings on Earth. One such instance resulted in a very tragic misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and misapplication of the concept. The idea was perverted and applied to mean that there is only one Isbi, instead of the truth that everyone is an Isbi. Obviously, this was a gross incomprehension and utter unwillingness to take responsibility for one's own power. Was he talking about Jesus? What's going on here? The old empire priests managed to corrupt the concept of individual immortality into the idea that there is only one all-powerful Isbi, and that no one else is or is allowed to be an Isbi. Obviously, this is the work of the old empire amnesia operation. It is easy to teach this altered notion to beings who do not want to be responsible for their own lives. Slaves are such beings. As long as one chooses to assign responsibility for creation, existence, and personal accountability for one's own thoughts and actions to others, one is a slave. As a result, the concept of a single monotheistic God resulted and was promoted by many self-proclaimed prophets, such as the Jewish slave leader Moses, who grew up in the household of the pharaoh Amenhotep III and his son Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, as well as his son Tutankhamun. The attempt to teach certain beings on Earth the truth that they are themselves Isbis was part of a plan to overthrow the fictional, metaphorical, anthropomorphic panoply of gods created by the old empire mystery cult called the Brothers of the Serpent, known in Egypt as the priests of Amun. They are a very ancient secret society within the old empire. Hold on, the Brothers of the Serpents. Is the old empire reptilian? But didn't the reptilians say that these other guys were evil? Got some alien propaganda going on here. The pharaoh Akhenaten was not a very intelligent being. and was heavily influenced by his personal ambition for self-glorification. He altered the concept of the individual spiritual being and embodied the concept in the sun god, Aten. His pitiful existence was soon ended. He was assassinated by Maya and Perenifer, two of the priests of Amun, or Amen, which the Christians still say, who represented the interests of the old empire forces. The idea of one God was perpetuated by the Hebrew leader Moses while he was in Egypt. He left Egypt with his adopted people, the Jewish slaves. While they were crossing the desert, Moses was intercepted by an operative of the old empire near Mount Sinai. Moses was tricked into believing that this operative was the one God through the use of hypnotic commands, as well as technical and aesthetic tricks which are commonly used by the old empire to trap Isbis. Thereafter, the Jewish slaves, who trusted the word of Moses implicitly, have worshipped a single God they call Yahweh. The name Yahweh means anonymous, as the Isbi who worked with Moses could not use an actual name or anything that would identify himself or blow the cover of the amnesia/prison operation. The last thing the covert amnesia hypnosis prison system wanted to do is to reveal themselves openly to the Isbis on Earth. They feel that this would restore the inmates' memories. This is kind of crazy. This is kind of nuts right now. We're in pretty nutty territory. All right, now I'm not saying you lost me, but these are really interesting details that I think I guess are important for this. I don't know. This is the reason that all traces of physical encounters between operatives of space civilizations and humans is very carefully hidden, disguised, covered up, and denied or misdirected. This old empire operative contacted Moses on a desert mountaintop and delivered the 10 hypnotic commands to him. These commands are very forcefully worded and compel an Isbi into utter subservience to the will of the operator. These hypnotic commands are still in the effect and influence the thought patterns of millions of Isbis thousands of years later. Incidentally, we later discovered that the so-called Yahweh also wrote, programmed, and encoded the text of the Torah, which when it is read literally or in its decoded form, will provide a great deal more false information to those who read it. Ultimately, the Vedic hymns became the source of nearly all of the Eastern religions and were the philosophical source of the ideas common to Buddha, Zoroaster, and other philosophers. The civilizing influences of these philosophies eventually replaced the brutal idolatry of the old empire religions and were the true genesis of kindness and compassion. You asked me earlier why the domain and other space civilizations do not land on Earth or make their presence known. Land on Earth? Do you think we are crazy? Or want to be crazy? It takes a very brave Isbi to come down through the atmosphere and land on Earth, because this is a prison planet with a very uncontrolled psychotic population. And no Isbi is entirely proof against the risk of entrapment, as with the members of the Domain Expeditionary Force who were captured in the Himalayas 8,200 years ago. I like how all of a sudden Airl is like, you think I'm nuts, bro? Coming to Earth? Coming to this crazy place? Yeah. Airl can't hang with us, man. We're too uncontrollable and psychotic. No one knows what Isbis on Earth are going to do. We are not scheduled to invest the resources of the domain to take total control of all the space surrounding the area at this time. This will occur in the not-too-distant future, about 5,000 Earth years, according to the time schedule of the domain. At this time, we do not prevent transports from other planetary systems or galaxies from continuing to drop Isbis into the Amnesia Force screen area. Eventually, this will change. I love how this just became like a clerical, bureaucracy-related problem for us. We're like, please free our souls from this eternal prison planet. And they're like, yeah, we'll get to it. Yeah, we got you scheduled down for 5,000 years. So not too long considering, the 80 trillion years of existence. Should only be another 5,000 years. So hang in there and we'll get back to you as soon as we loop back around. All right. I'm going to circle back around to this problem in 5,000 years. Warm regards, the domain. In addition, Earth inherently is a highly unstable planet. It is not suitable for settlement or permanent habitation for any sustainable civilization. This is part of the reason why it is being used as a prison planet. No one else would seriously consider living here for a variety of simple and compelling reasons. Well, let's hear them out. Because I tend to disagree. I think the fjords are beautiful. Just some amazing places on this Earth that would compel lots of people to want to colonize us. Number 1. The continental land masses of Earth are floating on a sea of molten lava beneath the surface, which causes the land masses to crack, crumble, and drift continually. Okay, not a bad note. All right, I'll give you 1 point. Number 2. Because of the liquid nature of the core, the planet is largely volcanic and subject to earthquakes and volcanic explosions. All right. Okay. Number 3. The magnetic poles of the planet shift radically, about once every 20,000 years. This causes a greater or lesser degree of devastation as a result of the tidal waves and climatic changes. Okay. All right, 3 for 3. Number 4. Earth is very distant from the center of the galaxy and from any other significant galactic civilization. This isolation makes it unsuitable for use, except as a pit stop or jumping off point along the way between galaxies. The moon and asteroids are far more suitable for this purpose because they do not have any significant gravity. Okay. Well, I don't know about that, so, I can't agree with it. Number 5. Earth is a heavy gravity planet with heavy metallic soil and a dense atmosphere. This makes it treacherous for navigational purposes. That fact that I am in this room as the result of an in-flight accident, in spite of the technology of my craft and my extensive expertise as a pilot, are proof of these facts. That's hilarious. That is pretty funny. That this, salty little being is like, your planet sucks, and the only reason I'm here is because it is unnavigable, it is dense, it is gravitationally anomalous, and we don't like it. We don't like coming here. We don't want to be here. This is a disgusting prison planet. I don't know. Our pilots seem to do just fine. Maybe you could take a note, Airl, on how to properly fly one of these things. Number 6. There are approximately 60 billion Earth-like Sun-type 12 Class 7 planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone. Not to mention the vast expanse of the domain and the territories we will claim in the future. It is difficult to stretch our resources to do so much more than a periodic reconnaissance of Earth, especially when there are no immediate advantages to invest resources here. Makes sense. I see you there. Not worth stopping by. Got it. On Earth, most beings are not aware that they are Isbis, or that there are spirits of any kind. Many other beings are aware of this, but nearly everyone has a very limited understanding of themselves as an Isbi. One of the reasons for this is that Isbis have been waging war against each other since the beginning of time. The purpose of these wars have always been to establish domination by one Isbi or group of Isbis over another. Since an Isbi cannot be killed, the objective has been to capture and immobilize Isbis. This has been done in a nearly unlimited variety of ways. The most basic method to capture and immobilize an Isbi is through the use of various kinds of traps. Isbi traps have been made and put into place by many invading societies, such as the one that established the old empire, beginning about 64 trillion years ago. Traps are often set up in the territory of the Isbis being attacked. Usually a trap is set within the electronic wave of beauty to attract the interest and attention of the Isbi. And when the Isbi moves towards the source of the aesthetic wave, such a beautiful building or beautiful music, the trap is activated by the energy put out by the Isbi. One of the most common trap mechanisms uses the Isbi's own thought energy output when the Isbi tries to attack or fight against the trap. Fight back against the trap. The trap is activated and energized by the Isbi's own thought energy. The harder the Isbi fights against the trap, the more it pulls the IBS toward it and keeps them stuck in the trap. Or the Isbi, you probably meant to spell Isbi there. Throughout the entire history of this physical universe, vast areas of space have been taken over and colonized by ISB societies who invade and take over new areas of space in this fashion. In the past, these invasions have always shared common elements. All right, let's see what they are. Number 1, the overwhelming use of force of arms, usually with nuclear or electronic weapons. Number 2, mind control of the ISBs in the invaded area through the use of electroshock, drugs, hypnosis, erasure of memory, and implantation of false memory or false information intended to subjugate and enslave the local ISB population. Check. Number 3, takeover of natural resources by the invading ISBs. Check. Number 4, political, economic, and social slavery of the local population. These activities continue in present time. All of the ISBs on Earth have been members of one or more of these activities in the past, both as an invader or as part of the population being invaded. There are no saints in this universe. Very few have avoided or been exempted from warfare between ISBs. ISBs on Earth are still the victims of this activity at this very moment. The between lives amnesia administered to ISBs is one of the mechanisms of an elaborate system of old empire ISB trap. Well, that's interesting because, again, I reference Dr. Michael Newton and his books Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls and so forth, where the focus of the books is life between life. It is about our souls and where they go between lives. Now, this is proposing that that whole life between life thing might just be controlled suggestion. If you created a being and wanted to control it, you would have to have some type of firewall or some type of, I don't know, some type of screen in place where if the physical body underwent hypnotic regression, it would automatically tap into the information that was placed there for it to be uncovered, right? So that all of these past life regression or between life regressions are actually just implanted false memories that are at the base of our consciousness in case, we breach this conscious barrier, like we do during hypnotic regression. I don't know, just an interesting thought. Interesting and terrifying. This operation is managed by an illicit renegade secret police force of the old empire, using false provocation operations to disguise their activity in order to prevent detection by their own government, the domain, and by the victims of their activities. They are mind control methods developed by government psychiatrists. Earth is a ghetto planet. It is the result of an intergalactic holocaust. ISBs have been sentenced to Earth either because, 1, they are too viciously insane or perverse to function as a part of any civilization, no matter how degraded or corrupt. 2, or they are a revolutionary threat to the social, economic, and political caste system that has been so carefully built and brutally enforced in the old empire. Biological bodies are specifically designed and designated as the lowest order of entity in the old empire caste system. When an ISB is sent to Earth and then tricked or coerced into operating in a biological body, they're actually in a prison inside a prison. Okay, it gets worse. Cool. I will say, it is kind of funny that they're like, you're either a deviant pervert or, a freedom fighter. I bet like most people watching out there are like, well, I think I know which one I am. I mean, it's kind of insane that like they just, put two categories out there. Number 3, in an effort to permanently and irreversibly rid the old empire of such untouchables, the eternal identity, memory, and abilities of every ISB is forcefully erased. This final solution was conceived and carried out by the psychopathic criminals who are controlled by the old empire. I mean, that's a bit of a, final solution in quotes, obviously referring to Hitler. And yep, here we go. The mass extermination of untouchables in prison camps created by Germany during World War II were recently revealed. Likewise, the ISBs of Earth are the victims of spiritual eradication and eternal slavery inside frail biological bodies, inspired by the same kind of craven hatred in the old empire. So we're just basically incarnations of the worst the universe has to offer, or some of the best. The kind and creative inmates of Earth are continuously tortured by butchers and lunatics who are controlled by the old empire prison operators. The so-called civilizations of Earth, from the age of useless pyramids to the age of nuclear holocaust, have been a colossal waste of natural resources, a perverted use of intelligence, and an overt oppression of the spiritual essence of every single Isby on the planet. If the domain sent ships to every corner of the universe in search of hell, their quest could end on Earth. What greater brutality can be inflicted on anyone than to erase their spiritual awareness, identity, ability, and memory that is the essence of oneself? Oof. Wow. Yeah, that would be a big tragedy, wouldn't it? The majority of the lost members of the domain force have followed the general progression of Western civilization from India into the Middle East, then to Chaldee and Babylon into Egypt, through Archaea, Greece, Rome, into Europe, to the Western Hemisphere, and then all around the world. The members of the Lost Battalion, and so many other Isbys on Earth, could be valuable citizens of the domain, not including those who are vicious criminals or perverts. Unfortunately, there has been no workable method conceived to emancipate the Isbys from Earth. Therefore, as a matter of common logic, as well as the official policy of the domain, it is safer and more sensible to avoid contact with the Isby population of Earth until such time as the proper resources can be allocated to locate and destroy the old Empire force screen and amnesia machinery and develop a therapy to restore the memory of an Isby. So once again, we're kind of here waiting for our ride, but ain't quite ready. You know, one thing I will say though, if this is the worst, how can we still feel love? How can we still feel joy, right? Maybe the amount of joy we feel just pales in comparison to what's actually out there. Who knows? But I'm quite happy with this place. And if I can be happy in hell, well, I can be happy anywhere. So I'll leave it at that. Let me know your thoughts below. There's a lot to digest there. Some of this, you know, does feel somewhat like it could have legs. You know, again, I'm not here to ask you to believe or not to believe, and I'm not going to tell you whether or not I believe it or don't believe it. But I do feel like it's very interesting in that some of the concepts that have been talked about here were actually mentioned by the Farsight community, who I've looked into quite extensively recently, which is a group of like remote viewers that task themselves with certain things. They remote view this book, for instance. They'll remote view Bob Lazar, for instance, and all these other things that are just out of our reach, and then, you know, report on that. And they have like different remote viewers. So a lot of the stuff that comes up in here, you know, has been corroborated by them, and take that for what it's worth. A lot of other, you know, books, when you look at Journey of Souls, and, you know, you look at some of the stuff that Matt Brown, the whistleblower, has talked about. Yeah, there just seems to be more and more corroborating evidence, but, you know, it is what it is. It's a story for now, maybe forever, but an interesting one at that. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next video. Peace and love.